To live alone without a husband is often misunderstood. Society sometimes wraps it in labels: lonely, unfulfilled, or waiting for someone. But the truth is, a woman who lives alone without a husband is not automatically incomplete. She is a whole breathing story of courage, resilience, vulnerability, and strength. She is rewriting the narrative of what it means to belong to herself first, before anyone else. One of the bravest decisions a woman who lives alone without a husband can make is to choose wholeness over approval. From the time many of us were little girls, we were told, sometimes directly, sometimes in subtle whispers, that our value would one day be validated by another person's choice, that our story would be complete when someone else picked us, that the fairy tale was waiting for us in the form of approval, not authenticity. But wholeness is a very different pursuit. Wholeness is not about being chosen by someone else. It is about choosing yourself. It is standing in front of the mirror and declaring, I will not trade pieces of my soul just to be accepted by a world that doesn't fully see me. Approval is seductive. It offers the illusion of safety. If people nod, if society applauds, if family feels proud, then maybe we're doing it right. But approval is fragile. The same voices that cheer today may criticize tomorrow. Living for approval is like building a house on sand. It crumbles with the first storm. Wholeness, on the other hand, is solid ground. It asks you to face your truth, even the uncomfortable parts. It asks you to walk away from relationships that shrink you, jobs that silence you, and choices that betray you. Wholeness is not perfect. It is honest. And honesty is where real power lives. A woman who lives alone without a husband is someone who has chosen to be whole rather than to perform for approval. She has resisted the temptation and to check the boxes that society says make her valuable. She has said no to the easy applause and yes to the deeper, harder work of becoming herself. And here's the paradox. When you no longer chase approval, you often find deeper connection, because people are not truly drawn to perfection. They are drawn to authenticity. The moment you stop pretending, you start belonging. The woman who lives alone without a husband does not chase the hollow nods of others. She chooses her wholeness, and in that choice, she finds a freedom that applause could never offer. One of the greatest misconceptions about a woman who lives alone without a husband is that she must be lonely. People project their own fears onto her life. Fears of silence, of empty rooms, of quiet evenings without someone else's presence. But here's the truth. Loneliness and solitude are not the same. They may look alike from the outside, but they feel profoundly different on the inside. Loneliness is the ache of disconnection. It is the sense that you are unseen, unheard, or unvalued. Loneliness whispers that you do not belong anywhere, and it drains the spirit. But solitude is a gift. Solitude is the presence of your own company. It is the chance to sit with yourself, to breathe without distraction, to hear the sound of your own thoughts, and to learn that your presence is enough. When a woman chooses solitude, she learns that her life doesn't need to be filled with noise to be full. She begins to see that her kitchen table set for one can be sacred, that her laughter, even when no one else hears it, is still beautiful, that her prayers, whispered in silence, are still powerful. Solitude teaches her that she is not waiting for life to begin. She is already living it. And here's what makes this truth even more radical. Solitude builds capacity for deeper connection, because when you have learned to befriend yourself, you no longer use relationships as a way to escape yourself. You don't cling out of fear. You connect out of choice. You don't settle for half-hearted love. You recognize and honor the real thing when it comes. So, the woman who lives alone without a husband is not necessarily lonely. More often, she is someone who has discovered the richness of solitude. She has turned silence into strength. She has transformed being alone into belonging to herself. And from that place, every relationship she chooses, friendship, family, or romance, comes from abundance, not desperation. For too long, we have been taught that strength looks like armor. We're told it means never needing help, never showing emotion, never cracking under pressure. But a woman who lives alone without a husband knows that true strength doesn't come from armor, it comes from vulnerability. Living alone requires resilience, yes. It takes resilience to handle the logistics, paying every bill on your own, fixing what breaks, making decisions without a partner's input, and carrying responsibilities that others might share. But there's a deeper, quieter strength that's even more profound, the strength of facing yourself in the silence. Vulnerability is being able to sit in an empty room on a hard day and admit, I feel scared, I feel tired, I feel unsure. Vulnerability is all. Lowering yourself to cry without rushing to hide the tears. Vulnerability is refusing to pretend you're invincible, because pretending keeps you disconnected. Here's the paradox. Vulnerability feels like weakness, but it is the birthplace of courage. A woman who dares to live alone without covering her humanity in armor discovers that being open about fear, about hope, about longing actually makes her stronger. Because when you embrace vulnerability, you stop fighting yourself. You carry life not as a battle to be won, but as a story to be lived. And that story is powerful. Because when a woman demonstrates that she can be both independent and vulnerable, she shatters the stereotype that strength must mean hardness. She shows that it is possible to pay the bills, run the household, and chase her dreams, while still being soft enough to feel, brave enough to risk, and whole enough to love. Her strength does not come from denying her needs. It comes from owning them. It does not come from silencing her emotions. It comes from honoring them. And it does not come from pretending she doesn't care. It comes from daring to care deeply, even when life is uncertain. This is what makes her strength extraordinary. She has redefined it, not as the absence of vulnerability, but as the full embrace of it. When a woman lives alone without a husband, her home becomes something more than walls and furniture. It becomes a mirror of her spirit. Unlike many who share their living space by default, she holds the rare freedom to design a sanctuary that reflects who she is, not who she is expected to be. Every object she chooses, every color she paints, every piece of art she hangs carries meaning. The plant she waters daily on her windowsill may remind her of growth. The blanket folded neatly on the couch may be her way of offering comfort to herself after long days. The books stacked beside her bed tell the story of curiosity and hunger for knowledge. Nothing is random, everything is intentional. In this way, her home is not just where she lives, it is where she belongs. And that belonging is not dependent on anyone else's approval. She doesn't need to apologize for the dishes left unwashed, or compromise on decor, or explain why she prefers quiet evenings with candles instead of loud gatherings. Her home breathes her freedom. But here's the deeper truth. Creating a home that reflects the soul is not about material beauty. It is about safety. For a woman living alone, her home is the place where she can be unmasked. It is the space where she can lay down her strength, admit her fears, sing without judgment, and rest without shame. In a world that often demands she perform, her home becomes the one place where she doesn't have to. And that kind of home doesn't just shelter her body, it shelters her spirit. It reminds her that she is not incomplete. It reminds her that she is not waiting for someone else to validate her space. She has already validated it with her presence. A woman who lives alone without a husband creates a home that ears back to her every day. This is enough. You are enough. And in that reflection, she learns that wholeness is not only inside her, it surrounds her. A woman who lives alone without a husband does not just face the silence of her home. She also faces the noise of society. People rarely stay quiet about choices that don't fit the mold. They ask questions loaded with judgment. Why aren't you married yet? Don't you get lonely? Aren't you afraid of growing old alone? Behind those questions is an unspoken script, one that says a woman's worth is measured by her proximity to a man. And here is where courage is required, not the kind of courage that fights with anger, but the kind that stands in truth. To face judgment is to hold steady when others project their fears onto you. It is to resist shrinking under criticism and to remember that your life does not need to be explained or justified. Judgment will always come because people are uncomfortable with what they don't understand. But courage means answering, not with defensiveness, but with clarity. I know who I am, and I am at peace with my choices. The woman who lives alone without a husband knows that every raised eyebrow, every whispered comment, every unsolicited opinion is not about her. It's about the lens through which others view the world. Courage, then, is not trying to change their minds. It is refusing to let their voices drown out her own. And here is the paradox. When you live authentically, judgment becomes a teacher. It teaches you where others' fears end and your freedom begins. It teaches you that you cannot control perception, but you can control presence. And it teaches you that real belonging does not come from bending to fit in. It comes from standing tall even when you stand alone. The courage to face judgment is what transforms a life that could feel heavy with shame into one that radiates dignity. A woman living alone without a husband embodies that dignity. She shows the world that a meaningful life does not need permission, and that the loudest approval is the one that comes from within. Living alone without a husband does not mean living in isolation. In fact, many women who choose this path often cultivate deeper, more intentional connections than those who live by default within traditional roles. The difference is this: her connections are chosen, not required. They are rooted in authenticity, not obligation. When a woman is not defined by a marriage status, she learns to shape relationships with her own hands and her own heart. Friendships become sacred, not convenient. She doesn't cling to people out of fear of being alone. She welcomes them because she truly values their presence. She isn't afraid to say no to relationships that drain her because she is no longer operating from scarcity. She is not trying to fill a void. She is building a circle. And here's the power of that circle. It is woven with intention. She chooses people who honor her boundaries, who celebrate her growth, and who don't reduce her worth to her relationship status. These are not casual connections. They are bonds of trust, laughter, and shared humanity. But connection on her own terms also means redefining what intimacy looks like. Intimacy is not limited to romance. Intimacy is found in the friend who listens without judgment, the sibling who knows her childhood stories, the neighbor who checks in, or the mentor who sees her potential. Connection, when chosen deliberately, expands far beyond the traditional script. By living alone and building relationships from a place of strength rather than desperation, she demonstrates one of life's greatest truths. We are wired for connection, but not at the cost of self-abandonment. She does not lose herself to belong. She finds people with whom she can belong as her whole self. In doing so, her life becomes proof that love is not confined to one role or one person. Love can be found everywhere when you dare to create connection on your own terms. For a woman who lives alone without a husband, freedom is one of her greatest gifts. She chooses her routines, her priorities, her dreams. She decides when the lights go out, how her weekends are spent, what direction her life will take. But freedom is never just a privilege. It is also a sacred responsibility. It is easy to think of freedom as endless possibility, but without intention, freedom can turn into chaos. With no one else setting boundaries, she must set her own. With no partner to share accountability, she must carry it herself. This is not a burden. It is the art of self-leadership. She learns discipline, not because someone demands it, but because her life depends on it. She learns how to create balance between work and rest, between spending and saving, between saying yes and saying no. Freedom without structure is emptiness, but freedom with responsibility becomes empowerment. And here's the beauty. When she embraces responsibility, her freedom grows even deeper, because freedom is not about doing whatever you want in the moment. It's about living in a way that honors your future. It's about choosing habits, relationships, and values that build a life you don't need to escape from. Her freedom teaches her ownership. Every victory is hers. Every mistake is hers. Every breakthrough, every setback, every small triumph belongs to her story. That ownership is not heavy. It is liberating. Because when she succeeds, she knows it was not by chance, not by someone else's rescue, but by her own courage and commitment. So the woman who lives alone without a husband carries freedom not as an escape, but as a sacred calling. She understands that independence is not about avoiding responsibility. It is about shouldering it with grace, with wisdom, and with strength. And in doing so, she shows us that freedom is not only a right, it is a responsibility to live fully, truthfully, and unapologetically. At the heart of this entire journey lies the most transformative truth. A woman who lives alone without a husband learns to belong first to herself. Belonging is one of our deepest human needs. We crave it in families, in friendships, in communities, in love. But too often women are taught to secure belonging by fitting in, by sacrificing parts of themselves, by earning approval at the cost of authenticity. The result is not true belonging. It is quiet self-abandonment. Belonging to yourself is different. It means standing in your own skin and saying, I am worthy of love, even if I don't meet someone else's checklist. It means refusing to exile parts of your personality, your dreams, or your story just to be accepted. It means being at home within yourself, no matter who does or doesn't show up at your door. For a woman living alone, this lesson is magnified. There are no constant external mirrors telling her who she is supposed to be, so she must become her own mirror. She learns to listen to her own voice, to trust her own wisdom, to sit with her own silence, and to find joy in her own company. This kind of self-belonging is not selfish. It is sacred, because when you belong to yourself first, you no longer beg others to define you. You enter relationships from abundance, not desperation. You give love freely, not as a bargain for validation, but as an overflow of the love you already carry within. And here is the most radical truth. When a woman belongs to herself, she becomes unshakable.